not filming, I don't know. Hang on. Getting there. Okay. So my research is on the relationship between a running program, one that takes place both in an indoor environment and an outdoor environment, and how that relates to psychophysiological stress. I'm using salivary cortisol to measure the physiological side of stress, and then I'm using the perceived stress scale and the profile of mood states to measure the psychological aspect of stress. So right off the bat, a little test prep for you guys. The dependent variable here is stress. It's what we're measuring, and then therefore the independent variable would be the actual running program itself. So the outline, just briefly, I'm going to go over an introduction, why I chose to do this as my topic, and also just a little bit of research that's already been done on the topic. I'm going to touch on my hypothesis and research questions, as well as some assumptions and limitations that this study has. And then kind of the majority of this presentation revolves around the study design and the procedures. Just because that's been the part where I've had the most fun kind of designing and manipulating what I can do to make the study better. And I think where you guys will have the most interest. So, and then at the end, I'll leave time for questions and suggestions as well. So just a brief introduction why I chose this topic. So I myself feel that I'm a pretty stressed individual. I've also dealt with some anxiety issues in the past and how to manage those. And going outside and specifically being active outside is something that's always helped me. And you know, it doesn't have to be high levels of activity, but you know, going for a jog outside has just always helped me kind of relieve some of those stresses. And I wanted to know if this was just me or if there was empirical research kind of backing this idea, and if there was, I wanted to add to that body of research. Also, Sharon and my teacher at my undergrad actually, you know, they said choose something that you're really interested in, because if you're not interested, the information's going to grow stale and you're going to lose motivation. So this is just something that I strongly believe in. I think the outdoors has so many unique qualities that help with stress reduction. I did my undergrad research on the effects of an indoor rock climbing program versus an outdoor rock climbing program and how those affected cortisol. Unfortunately, the procedures for that were a little shaky. Statistically, it wasn't very strong, so I kind of wanted to start fresh, start new, and implement it in a new way. So what research has already been done? There was a 1995 study done by these two researchers, Hart and Eilert. They took a group of participants and introduced them to 3 different environments, the same participants for each environment, and they had them run. The first environment was an outdoor environment, going for a run on the road, but outside. The second environment was running on a treadmill, but with an external stimulus. So they were listening to nature sounds on a headset while running on the treadmill. And then the third was also inside on a treadmill, but they were listening to internal sounds, so their breathing and their heartbeat while they were running. And they used both the profile of mood states, or the POMS, and also cortisol to measure stress. And what they found was that the outdoor running was the most beneficial for stress reduction, followed by the external component with the nature sounds, and then lastly, listening to their own heartbeat, the internal stimulus, actually had negative effects. It made their mood worse, which I found interesting. So using cortisol as a biomarker for stress and the research that's been done around this, there's been some studies in Japan surrounding this concept of Shinrin-yoku, or as it translates, forest bathing. And what this entails is having participants go out into nature and not necessarily exercise, but be very mindful of what's surrounding them. So the sounds of nature, the breeze, the overall green environment, and how that affects them. One of the studies had upwards of 800 participants, so that they were really able to generalize their findings to a larger population, which is great. And I think the most unique thing that they found was that the higher the stress level recorded by the individual at the beginning, the greater the effect of nature, which is wonderful. I mean, the more stressed that you are, the more that it's going to help. So, according to that study, I should say. So, review of terms. For me, it's really important in my study to differentiate between psychological stress and physiological stress. I didn't want to just look at what was happening in your mind, your mental state of stress, but also in your body, so you could kind of get the bigger picture, the full idea of what's happening. So psychological stress in this study being a state of mental tension and worry that's caused by problems in your life. And I put problems in quotation marks because, they're not always real. A lot of the time, we're making a situation out of the worst scenario, and it hasn't even happened to us yet. It's just how we're perceiving something to happen, which can be taxing. It can be stressful, but it's also a mental thing. Physiological stress then being our physical, our body's response, the actual physical response to a stressor, such as an environment, and this can directly relate to higher levels of cortisol that are released by something called our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And for those of you that don't know or aren't very familiar with the HPA axis, it's a major part of our neuroendocrine system, and it helps control our reactions to stress as well as regulate our body functioning around stress. So things like, or our body processes, so things like digestion, immune system, sex drive, energy levels, and then for me specifically, mood and emotions. So if you think of a time when you're really stressed, what are you feeling? You're tired, you're probably not eating good 3 meals a day, you might not be sleeping as much, your sex drive could be low, you're cranky, your immune system's down, so maybe you're getting a little sick or a sore throat. All of these things are directly related to our neuroendocrine system, and cortisol is one of the best ways to measure this, which is why I'm using salivary immunoassay kits to measure cortisol, and I'll kind of get to that and what those are later in the presentation. So the need for research, there's a growing levels of stress and anxiety and depression among specifically college-age students, which is why I want to target that population, which is leading to increased rates in obesity. There's a lot of pre-existing research that has to do with exercise and how those things correlate. For example, my roommate just did a study on high-intensity interval training and endurance training and how those two relate, but little has been done in relation to exercise specifically in different environments and how that kind of correlates with stress. So, and the environment is one of the main factors that I want to look at. It's one of the bigger interests that I have. And I think that there's just some great opportunities for, if I find the results that I want, where I find that the outdoor environment has a more beneficial impact on lowering stress than an indoor environment, then the implementation among college campus programs like outdoor pursuits facilities or outing clubs could really be outstanding. So my research question, pretty straightforward. Will the environment, outdoor versus indoor, affect psychological stress as indicated by my measurement tools, which I mentioned before? My hypothesis is that there will be a statistically significant relationship at the 0.005 level between stress and exercise. But more specifically, I think that the outdoor running environment will be more conducive to lowering stress than running in an indoor environment. So ideally, if the candidates react how how I would like them to. Not saying that they're going to, but the ideal findings in a participant would be lower scores on the perceived stress scale, higher scores on the profile of mood states, and then generally lower cortisol trends. And it's important to note here that cortisol, when we're exercising, our body is undergoing physical stress. So cortisol levels are actually going to peak during times of exercise, which is why I'm not taking cortisol samples at the time of exertion. I'm taking them at the beginning of each week in hopes that I'll find a lowering trend of cortisol rates over time. So limitations of this study, I'm going to have a small sample group, and this is due to a number of things. First off being, I don't have the money to spend on a whole lot of salivary cortisol immunoassay kits. They range from $200 to $300 a kit, and I'm looking at getting 2 to 3 kits, so I don't really have the funds for that. But also, testing all the saliva, it's rather time consuming, and I have limited time in the chem lab on campus. So it's going to be easier to keep it small. This means that the generalizability to a larger population might be reduced just because I don't have that many participants. It also relies heavily on the ability of the participants to be honest in answering the questionnaires each time, not skipping through questions because they don't feel like doing it. Also, in regards to testing parameters for cortisol, it's really optimal if you can get your participants to refrain from alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine 24 hours preceding the saliva collection, but at a minimum of 12 hours. And I know for a college-age population, or maybe any population, this is a hard thing to ask people. I know I like my coffee in the morning and my glass of wine at night, but it's just something that I'm going to have to be upfront about with participants, and hopefully that they can agree to do that. And then lastly, just I can't control outside forces such as things like weather, nutrition, hydration, temperature. For example, if someone has an outdoor run and it happens to be pouring rain and windy, that might affect their mood, but I can't control the weather, so it's just something that we mention and we move on. So subject selection, I'm going to have approximately 16 students, SUNY Cortland students, ages 18 to 28 roughly, and I want them to be non-runners, meaning that they don't already run over twice a week, because they would already then have kind of the benefits of being a regular runner. So I want to get people who don't necessarily run all the time. So recruitment for the study will be advertised through the SUNY Cortland, the new Student Life Center. So I work in recreational sports, and I have direct access. The people that I work with have direct access to, the fitness facilities, club sports, intramurals, things of that nature. So getting the word out that way, I think, is going to be my best bet. If I get more than 16 participants, randomization, I'll line up all of the people who are interested by alphabetical last name, and then just choose every other one on there. My guess is I won't have that many people interested because I'm asking kind of for a big commitment. So in that case, I'll just have to take the first 16 people that sign up. So data collection and design, this is kind of the coolest part, what I've had the most fun with, kind of tweaking and figuring out, what's going to work best. So again, I'm just observing, just for clarification, I'm observing the relationship between an indoor versus an outdoor running program and how that affects psychophysiological stress. So how am I going to do this, and what is the treatment actually going to look like? So I'm going to work with the exercise physiology department on campus. I'm lucky enough to live with 2 ex-phys students who are more than willing and interested in helping me create an entry-level running program that will be appropriate for this study. It will include indoor training days as well as outdoor training days, and it will last approximately 11 weeks. Week 1 is going to be baseline measurements, so participants won't run it all and they'll act as their own control. So those are like their baseline average measurements of cortisol and stress. Weeks 2 through 6, so I'm going to split the group up into 2 groups of 8. Weeks 2 through 6, depending on which group they're in, will either have indoor training weeks or outdoor training weeks. And then weeks 7 through 11, again, same thing, but they'll flip-flop groups. An important reason for doing this, for making them switch and not putting, say, everyone weeks 7 through 11 have outdoor training weeks, is because I don't want the effects of becoming a stronger runner over weeks 2 through 6 to be the reasoning for having a better mood, weeks 7 through 11. I want to make sure that I'm observing the right variables, so trying to control for those things where I can. And then each week, with the exception of week 1, will consist of 3 training runs. So again, collection chart, baseline testing, I'll administer 1 perceived stress scale, 1 profile of mood states, and then I'll collect 1 sample of salivary cortisol. Weeks 2 through 6, they'll do either 3 indoor runs or 3 outdoor runs. Again, 1 collection of each. And then on and so forth, weeks 7 through 11, same thing. What this looks like for me and for the participants, I will be collecting 176 of each of these things. So 176 perceived stress scales, 176 total profile of mood states questionnaires, and then a total of 176 total salivary cortisol tubes. I'm going to try to get in the lab, the chem lab, at the end of each week and kind of assess these things, put them into SPSS, put them into Excel at the end of each week. So it'll really only be, 16 of each category. So I have, space up in the chem lab that allows me to do that. For the participants, it's just 11 collections of salivary cortisol, 11 collections of the PSS and POMS, and then it'll be 30 runs in total for each participant, 15 in an outdoor environment and 15 in an indoor environment. So measurement tools, in this picture you can see, this is a picture from my undergrad. I realize now that I don't quite need collection tubes quite that large. That would be a lot of spit to ask for. So I brought in a sample of a Salometrics collection unit that I was just mailed for free in the mail. And this is what it looks like. I'll open up the link to it here in a second too. But basically it's a little plastic tube. It has measurement levels on the side. The cap in the top is specifically designed so that the spit that goes through, this sounds disgusting to some people, but I get really excited about it. It isn't aerated, so it won't be really bubbly. It'll be what we call a whole saliva sample. And I'm using a passive drool method, which also sounds disgusting, but basically I give each participant a cup of water. They swish it around in their mouth, swallow it, and then kind of lean their head forward and let the saliva, the drool, kind of pool in the front of the mouth, and then gently force it through this collection tube here. So we can pass those around. You guys can look at them. Let me know if you have any questions. It also is important to note, just going back, that the saliva is not affected, or affected very little by freeze-thaw cycles, so that when I take a collection, I'm basically putting it in a cooler and running it up to the chem lab and sticking it in a freezer. I have a designated freezer up in the chemistry department. It's like in a creepy basement. It's great. But I can, put the sample in the freezer, take samples of that as I need it. Like that's the master sample, and then I can take as many samples from there as I can. And I just have to use it, test it within 60 days, which shouldn't be an issue. So then, just to recap, I don't know if this needs any more clarification, but week 1, the baseline testing is when I'll hold the main meeting. I'll give each participant like a little folder. It'll have 11 copies of the PSS forms, 11 copies of the profile of mood states, and they'll be instructed to fill one of each of those out at the end of their 3rd run each week. And then during that meeting, we'll hopefully set up times for them to come in and talk to me, so that I can get a saliva sample each week. So say Monday mornings, I tell them that I'm in my office from 8 to 10 and they need to come in but sometime between those 2 hours to give me a sample. It is important to get the samples earlier in the morning, the better. They act on it what's called a diurnal cycle, meaning that the peak cortisol levels are in the morning and then they'll get weaker throughout the day. So the more valid the sample, the earlier the day, or earlier time of the day. It's also relatively important to test each person at the same time each week. So if they come in at 9 a.m. that first Monday, they kind of want to stay within that hour time frame for the rest of the next 10 weeks that they come in. And then when they come in to do the saliva, that's also when I'll collect the PSS and the PALMS forms from the previous week, and I'll have them, and then I'll be able to, do my research from there and kind of see the trends as they emerge, which I think will be really cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Does anyone have, I guess, any questions or suggestions on what I could do? I guess I need to mention that the actual instrument that the cortisol gets measured with, it sounds harder than it is. It's this machine called the spectrometer. So the kit that I get comes with chemicals, and I add a certain amount of chemical to each sample, and I put it in this infrared spectrometer, which beams a laser through it, and based on how much light can penetrate through the sample, it can kind of run diagnostics and give me a very specific number about how much cortisol is present. So, it sounds complicated, but there's a lot of really fancy schmancy equipment out there that makes my life easier. So, yeah, I guess I'll open it up now for questions, and, yep, thanks.